Hey, welcome to the Overshare Pamphlet. My name is Rob, and I'm the host of this one-man show coming to you every Monday at 6 a.m. UK time. And this is my personal episode about Wuthering Heights. And mostly, it's not going to be specifically too much in depth about what I think of the movie. I will touch upon that, but I think it's mostly about the greater story at hand, which is book adaptations and what is correct and what should be changed, and what works and what doesn't, and when do we stop caring about changes in book adaptations and all this stuff, and when it is a good how to spot, I guess, a good book adaptation. There's a lot of questions that this book adaptation basically has generated, I think, but there's something to be said about art always being something new and something reinventive of something that already exists. Nothing nowadays specifically can be considered freshly innovative in that sense, like something completely never heard before. It's always something like that is reinterpreted in different fonts in different ways. But I think what really stands out usually, and what really becomes successful and becomes memorable, is how can you tell something that people have already seen and heard before in a new way, in a new perspective, from a different perspective, from a more interesting and nuanced way, or just simply in a different and weird interpretation of something. So I think in general, what the movie has been generating is just a lot of chatter about what is acceptable as a book adaptation and what isn't, and what works and what doesn't work, and whether this movie basically is utter shit just simply because it's not adapting the book in a very faithful way. So I will firstly go through very broad strokes, I guess, what the original story is about and what the main changes, I guess, are in the new movie that just came out for Valentine's Day, literally. So first of all, the book is called, of course, Wuthering Heights, but is also originally the book is by Emily Bronte, while the movie adaptation that came out this year is also called Wuthering Heights, but in quotation marks, and is by none other than Emerald Fennell, who is also, I think, mostly famous for Saltburn, but she's done many other features that are all critically acclaimed, and it's quite surprising to see already how, for the first time, she's receiving some very concerning reviews, critical reviews specifically, that don't really, they're not really pushing her to the forefront anymore. I think many critics are extremely disappointed in how this movie came out. But we'll get into that. First, what is the actual book about? Now, the book itself is sort of gothic novel. I would label it. I think many people would agree that it is a gothic novel more than necessarily a romantic novel, because there's a lot of chatter about, there's a lot of discussion. It's still a bit, something that has been always been talked about, I guess, for ages, but ever since the book came out, whether this book is actually romantic novel, or if it's instead more like a story about generational trauma and abuse and obsession, let's just say, more than anything. I would actually go as far as to say it is a gothic romance in that sense. There is the gothic element that is really strong here. I think that I would call it first a gothic novel, and second a romance / depiction of toxic love, let's just say. So the first book, there's the original Wuthering Heights was published in 1847 by, of course, Emily Bronte, and it is roughly centered around two families, the Earnshaw and the Linton families. They're both very important families in the Yorkshire moors, but the addition to in between these two families, I guess, the one element that really causes a lot of distress and changes, I guess, is the addition of Heathcliff, who is, from the books, most definitely someone of mixed race origin, in that sense. Like, he is ethnically mixed race, or like they're definitely not white. Let's just say definitely not Caucasian. Either mixed race, or people are saying maybe he's described in the book as a gypsy, I think, but it could be Indian, it could be Middle Eastern, it could be of different descents, basically. But he's definitely not white. I think that's very clear from the book, especially because the way he's treated and the way he's called is very much what slaves were called as back in the 1800s. So yes, that's the starting point, I guess. That's really important here to note that basically once we follow the main book follows basically Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff's twisted love story, in that sense, and the two of them are raised together, but basically Catherine marries the wealthy Edgar Linton for status, causing a heartbroken Heathcliff to embark on like decades-long revenge against the Earnshaw and Linton families. So yeah, I mean, he's brought into the quote-unquote family by Catherine's dad, but it's clear that he's someone who either a former slave who was freed and started becoming it wanted to become more accepted by society and all that stuff. But he's definitely brought into this family by Catherine's father, and they grow up together and they definitely become very attached. But because of social norms and because of Catherine's desires to help actually Heathcliff to climb the ladder, I guess, in society, she marries someone else from the Linton family, and sort of uses his influence on society to like just sort of help Heathcliff to climb the ladder. But because of this choice, basically, she makes Heathcliff quite let's just say jealous, very tormented, very obsessive over this choice, and he becomes sort of hung up on revenge so much. And even when Catherine dies while she's giving birth to her daughter, I believe, ultimately, basically, Heathcliff brings this like sort of revenge also to future generations that are born from Catherine and Edgar Linton. So he creates sort of like, he puts in motion like a generational trauma that only breaks once he dies as well. And he dies, it's sort of like a suicide, basically. He stops eating and he wants to be reunited with Catherine eventually. So yeah. So yeah, I mean, there are multiple plot lines in the book. The book is very complex and it's very nuanced, and it's for being written in the 1800s. It is, I think, still to this day considered one of the most interesting and forward-thinking, at least, books from that era. And it's much beloved by many people. I think it's a classic for sure. People all, especially in England, but I think everywhere, anyone who's obsessed with like English literature would know about Wuthering Heights and how its themes have inspired many other books. And I would even like consider, like, if you are a fan of Twilight, which I'm a very big Twihard, you would sort of agree with me that it definitely takes a lot from that book. So yeah, there's a lot to be said about it. So it's basically like, a venerated book, something that has a very big fan base as well. That's very important to note. But it definitely delves into like so many complex themes, like society and like class struggle, and definitely religion, race, also feminism, very importantly. There's a lot of class mobility and class clash in that sense, and how rigid society was back in the 1800s as well, and how important wealth is even to this day. I think there's a lot of themes that are very relatable and very complex, and also specifically when it comes to the relationship between the two main characters, the most interesting, I would say, version of this is, of course, the fact that this is a twisted romance. Something that is not entirely supposed to be seen as romantic is quite complicated. But also, I feel like the main point that I think is also beloved by the fans is the portrayal of all the characters in this. None of them are simple. Let's just say there are so many different deeply disturbing moments about each character. They all have weird, very dark secrets, I would say. Especially also like Heathcliff is definitely not like simply like a tormented man, let's just say, but he has actual violent issues. So issues with violence, sorry, let's just put it that way. He is literally a murderer of dogs and like animals and everything else. But there's a lot in the book. But as you can tell, the book is very very complicated and very interesting in that regards. So needless to say, it is a very tall order to adapt something this extensive and this complicated. But I think it's definitely. So I mean, as a first basis, I guess, like when you go into the movie, you would at least try and give and cut her some slack. At least cut Emerald Fennell some slack, because she deserves at least the flowers for trying to adapt something so complicated and so beloved by many. So the tall order is also, of course, to appease so many different people who have read this book for ages. Like this, especially when it's like a classic like this, there's also always a risk, a very high risk of angering people. And guess what? It did happen. But I think there's definitely things that could have been done differently. Now let's go into the movie itself. The movie is quite simplified, let's just say. I mean, impossible not to do that when it comes to this sort of adaptation, but also it's extremely simplified, like very much so. There are a lot of points that are nuances of the characters that are left out. Also, most importantly, also by as I guess like highlighted by many different newspapers and I guess coverage of the movies as well. The biggest change, I guess, about the movie is that it completely cuts the second half of the book. So the movie basically stops when Catherine dies. While in the books, basically, you follow the future generations as well and how they break the intergenerational trauma, which is actually very interesting. I would say like a very interesting part of the novel that has never properly been adapted, I think. Emerald Fennell decides to just cut off that part and just end the movie after her death. So that's one of the biggest changes. But also I feel like there are so many different additions that make the movie slightly kinkier and slightly more sexually charged. But again, I would also argue that compared to the trailers, at least, there's nothing more that happens in the movie. Like what you see in the trailer that is very sexually charged and very kinky in that sense, that's as far as it gets. There's nothing more than that. Like it doesn't get any further than that. Apart from Jacob Elordi's weird it's not his fault, of course. That's the way the character, I guess, is written in the movie. But he is obsessed with licking things, like just licking everything. I don't fucking know. It's just fucking weird, honestly. But yeah. So safe to say that the movie takes a lot of liberties, but there are many interviews with Emerald Fennell herself who says that she did put this movie out in quotation marks. The title is in quotation marks. It's not Wuthering Heights, period. It's just like Wuthering Heights in quotation marks, because it is her, according to herself, it is a interpretation of the novel based mostly on how she read the book when she was 14. So it's supposed to be like a fantasized version of it, and I would actually agree with many critics that this is a sort of like a fan fiction version of the book. Now, what really stands out in the movie, I think, what really at least I carry still to this day. I mean, I just watched it today, actually, this afternoon, the movie, but what I still think about when I think about the movie is the visual cues and novelty of the movie. Like, the movie is strikingly beautiful. I think there are a lot of good usages of colors and interesting materials for the costumes. There's latex as well, which was definitely not used back in the days, and so in this way at least. Different stylistic choices that are quite you know literally like a fantasized version of what the character actually were supposed to look like, I guess. But this is not. I personally think this is not like a bad note. I would say actually it's a positive one. It's interesting. I always like when period pieces like this get reinvented stylistically, at least quite a bit, because we've all seen presentations of these types of period pieces. Like they're, yes, you can be historically accurate, but I think it's even more interesting to play, at least fashion wise and visually at least as well, with how things could have looked differently. Let's just say it's sort of like a what if version of Wuthering Heights. What if Catherine was much less complicated as a character and was more like Barbie, let's just say. And what if Heathcliff is more like I don't know, I don't even want to give injustice to Jacob Elordi, because I do think he's an incredible actor, but what if he's not let's just say a man of color and he's just a white dude who was a lazy worker and just gets introduced into his family and gets obsessed with a girl. Like, there are definitely a lot of creative liberties here, but Emerald Fennell, in other interviews as well, she does I guess bring the point forward that she made a choice to at least still preserve many of the lines from the book, like at least the romantic exchanges between the two characters, the two main characters. A lot of the lines are actually, in fact, taken from the books. I do agree with her that they are some of the most iconic parts of the book as well. Like there are some incredible lines, exchanges, and dialogues between them. It is, as she says, an exquisite work, because some of these lines are just so cool, like so memorable, so poetic, and I do appreciate that inclusion. And I do think both actors are actually very well poised in terms of acting. Like they're both at their A game, like here, but I don't necessarily see the chemistry between the two of them, if that makes any sense. I think part of it is also, and I don't want to be ageist necessarily, like there can always be interest in like having a younger guy interested in an slightly older woman. Not to say that Margot Robbie's old. That's far from the truth. But like, for example, if you watched Baby Girl, as much as that movie was also kind of weird, you could at least really feel the chemistry between Nicole Kidman and whatever the guy's name is. So it can definitely be done, but I feel like the relationship between the two of them, as long as it's supposed to be, of course, very sexual and very like a very yearning type of performance, at times it just feels like they are actually brother and sister, or like she's the oldest sister or whatever, because technically it's also how the relationship works in the books, if I have to be honest. But there's no, I don't know, when it comes to dialogue specifically, I think they're both trying to act at their A game, but I don't feel, at least for me, the chemistry here. Maybe I'm the only one, and feel free to disagree, of course, in the comments. But I think the movie is could have used, at least I think, a different pairing. Whether you wanted to give the role to just Margot Robbie, because she's also executive producer in, I think, in this movie, or whether you just wanted to give it to Jacob Elordi instead of both of them, you could have paired them with different people, I think. And I do think that the biggest, of course, problem here is that you should have at least given the representation where representation is due. I mean, in this day and age where race bending is angering a lot of white people, it's only fair that we, like, people from different backgrounds get also angry when representation that was in the original book is not done right. Like when you race bend towards also the white people, it's also not, it's not working. It's you're gonna get dragged, and rightfully so. I would say at least this is like at least one of the points that I would really agree with everyone, that it is unfortunate that this choice was made, I think. I do think both of them are going to be fine, like as in the actors. because I think at the end of the day, it's not like a career-ending performance. Like, they both are very good actors. Let's just be very clear. Even in this movie, you can see how good they are. For Emerald Fennell, I think she really needs to get the next movie she does right. Let's just say, if she wants to keep making these very interesting interpretations, at least. But yeah, so I have very conflicting feelings about the movie. I think overall I didn't enjoy it, and again, I don't think I've never properly read the full novel. I just read. I think I remember studying it in high school and all that stuff, and I do remember just reading basically passages from it and all that stuff. But I've never properly read the full book. But even I was not even I who have not read the book, I still think that the movie itself is quite bland. And it tries too hard sometimes, and I'm not necessarily talking about, again, the visual aspect, which I really actually enjoyed, but more so the sexuality of it all, of this movie. I don't think Yearning is done as well as it's done, for example, in Heated Rivalry, and go listen to my Heated Rivalry episode, please, to know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I feel like there's something missing. I think this movie is also too long for what it needs to be, especially when we are cutting away half of the book. I don't understand why we're stopping so long on the first half of the book and cut off the second part, when we could have done, maybe if you really wanted to do just the first half of the book, you could have done a more linear story, like a more simplified storyline. And again, the movie is simplified in terms of storyline and plotline and the characters and everything else, so I don't understand why it's this long. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, I would compare it as to watching a music video that is very strikingly beautiful, but there's no substance to it. Maybe that's quite mean, but I think the substance is, like, let's just say diluted. Let's just say in this way. But yeah, I mean, I did read quite a few like reviews for the movie in preparation for this episode, and I do find a lot of interesting thoughts coming out of those specifically. Let's just say, for example, I read Keith Ulich, apologies for butchering your surname, for all parentheses. One of the best quotes from his review was, "It often feels like we're watching a Mopic incarnation of the smutty scratchings doodle in the margins of a science textbook by a bored middle schooler." And that's so true. Like, you can see that there is, when you ever, I don't know, I don't know if you guys ever had talented, or like promising artists in your class that were doodling stuff, and you were like, oh my god, these look very cool, but that's as far as it gets. Like, they are promising, but it's nothing like, oh my god, it's a painting, like a work of art or whatever. You can see the promising aspects of it, but you're like, okay, but I want you to actually do a full painting here. You know what I mean? I want you to actually do a full body of work. So it's like a prototype, a first draft, let's just say, of what could have been done much, much better. So I do agree with that. I think that's very well positioned in that sense, in terms of critique. I do think part of his other critiques of the movie are a bit maybe too far-fetched, but I do think this part really resonated with me. Then I read the Deborah Ross review for The Spectator. She said it's a teenage sex dream that ends halfway through the book, and I'm not sure if 14-year-old Emerald Fennell finished the book either. It does seem like this is what I want to know now. Of course, I assume she went back to the book in preparation for this movie, but is it solely based on her interpretation of the book from when she was 14 years old? Because if that's the case, then what's interesting about that? When you're 14, you don't get all the complexities of a story this big, and that's what really comes across here, that is just scratching the surface of what really needs a more thorough analysis of what is talked about in the book. So that's very well worded, I guess. Then I think that my favorite review was the Annie Burke review for TNR, and that is also I mean, if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, she actually gave it, I think, a 60% or something like around that. She gave it a fresh score in that sense. She didn't give it like a rotten score, but the review itself is quite nuanced, and there's a lot of criticisms also raised in the review. But I think I do fall more into what Annie Burke thinks of the movie. So what she says basically in some of her passages from the review, she says like the Fennell's version leaves out the second half of the story, in which the next generation of Earnshaws and Heathcliff's breaks generational trauma, let's just say, and in which romantic love and abuse are indistinguishable. Characters are collapsed, she says, erased, granted tidy backstories, while the most gothic elements, just the implication that Heathcliff is Catherine's half-brother, fall away. Meanwhile, the choice to cast a white actor as a dark-skinned, she criticizes, racially indeterminate Heathcliff drew sharp criticism from corners of the internet, suggesting that posh Oxford-educated Fennell is more interested in bourgeois provocation than critiquing Britain's race and class hierarchies then or now. In a review also, she says that her previous, referring to Emerald Fennell's movies, her previous movies seem to be more inspired by Bronte's works and ideas more than this adaptation of her actual novel. So, like, I mean, you can actually definitely see a lot of inspiration from Bronte's gothic themes into Saltburn, for example, the most vivid scene also in terms of like how, you know, the main character pines over the grave of his dead lover. So there's definitely, she definitely respects Emerald Fennell definitely respects the original material. There is no doubt about that. But I think, sadly, because she was trying to adopt the magnum opus, she failed. I think with this one. She also says, Annie Burke also says that this new adaptation offers, in lieu of fidelity, is promiscuous pastiche, equal parts of Guillermo del Toro and V.C. Andrews. Wuthering Heights is exaggerated in every sense of the word, misty but vivid, a loud and horned up melodrama that is weird and basic at the same time. It's got the real getting loser we're going to the moors energy, as Fennell and Robbie attempt to appeal to a generation ready to fall in love with a less challenging, more sentimental imagining of an old classic. Now, I think this was very interesting to me specifically. I really thought that this was such an interesting point of view, and it sort of highlights probably one of the biggest mistakes with the movie and the adaptation itself. I think Emerald Fennell forgets that the new generations, if they were meant to be her target audience here, the new generations were raised to be critical, especially of past times, and they do not want a representation of these epochs to be devoid of any social commentary. Like, in my opinion, I feel like it's like talking to your parents. I mean, I think you guys have had this situation multiple times, but it's like talking to your parents about some past historic events, or like talking about their childhood or whatever, and they very easily discount our times as being much worse than where they lived, and they look fondly and romanticize their times without necessarily really critiquing whatever was going on in the backdrop. You know, it's like, it's the same thing. We're raised to be historically critical, if that makes any sense, and to specifically when it comes to, I guess, classics as well. Like, whatever you go in uni these days, what teachers really teach you in that sense is to be as impartial as possible, not to be necessarily overly critical, but also not to be overly simplistic when looking at certain adaptations or books or anything, especially when it comes to past novels and great classics. Like, people have been studying for ages and reinventing and reimagining and reviewing constantly what very old staples in the literature have said. So I think it's a big mistake to think that by simplifying the story, we would all get on board with it. We don't. If you want to talk about, like, you know, something more kinky in that sense, and want to talk about like sexual fantasies and all that stuff, just do an original story. Like, that's why Saltburn, I think, worked really well, because it wasn't necessarily like a straight up adaptation of any Emily Bronte's books, but it did take elements from that gothic romantic thing, and definitely made a new novel, like, you know, a new story, completely reimagining, like inventing the wheel in that sense. So without having necessarily to have like the baggage of being truthful to the original material, I think Saltburn was definitely more, I guess, like a thought experiment that worked really well. While here, you are anchored, unfortunately, by the original material, which is widely known and respected and analyzed and criticized as well. So, yeah, I mean, you cannot simplify the grades. Let's just say this is just the main critique that I have. I think for the movie itself, it doesn't matter if it's like an interpretation of the original. So it's true. Like books when they get adapted to, like big movies, there's definitely something that gets left behind, and there's definitely like a filter from the director. But what really matters the most, especially when it comes to the classics, I think, is to at least get the main plot points correctly and the main themes correctly. Like, we all are going to have different opinions and different things at the end of the day, because we all read the book, or like we all know of the book, or we all know sort of what the main points of the book are. But to completely disregard that as if it was like an impressionist painting, let's just say, it doesn't work as well when it comes to like literature piece in that sense, especially, again, as I said, a very old one. So yeah, I mean, Burke's review goes on as well, and it gets even more interesting in my opinion. But she says, for example, like she pulls prodigiously from the look of 1970s cinema and its inheritors, the old far from the madding crowd or the new beguiled, and several works from exploited art house filmmaker Catherine Breillat, as well as 1974's controversial Third Reich set The Night Porter. But there are more motifs, as she said, like, or images that go unnoticed and unmentioned. The sooty, burned out shell of Wuthering Heights, littered with piles of seafoam bottles, could almost be a Tim Burton set, while the image of an ailing Catherine, bleeding and covered in leeches, belongs in an Italian giallo film. So, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Emerald Fennell, regardless of this movie, she is an incredible director because she knows the movies. Like, she takes inspiration from the greatest, and she's very tasteful in both visually and direction wise. But I think it's a tall order to ask for someone like that, so artistically inclined, to instead, I guess, truthfully tell a story that is beloved by so many people. So yeah, I think it goes back to the criticism that I was talking about earlier anyways. But and also I think another very interesting point is when she talks about the character of Isabella's point of view and reimagination in this book. She says that it is within Isabella's mousy, lustful literary gaze that this new Wuthering Heights finds a point of view, the unexpected romance trapped inside its bodice ripper rebrand. This is perhaps where Fennell falters most gravely, not by scrapping the old or instituting the new, but instead by not recognizing what she has. Like, she does say that Isabella in this movie basically is supposed to be the target audience, basically. It's supposed to represent the point of view of the target audience that Emerald Fennell is trying to like pander towards. But I think she really misses a big opportunity here to like actually dig deeper into the complexities of a character also, as well as Isabella. So yeah, I mean, tea. And again, this, as I said at the beginning of the episode, this definitely spirals more generally into like a bigger conversation about adaptations in general. And I did read also a very interesting article from Justin Myers for The Truth About Everything. He doesn't talk necessarily not only about Wuthering Heights, but also talks about Heated Rivalry and other books that have been adapted to the big screen and the small screen. But he does bring very interesting points, like, is it really important to necessarily hit the nail on the head when it comes to adaptations? And he does get to a conclusion that I don't necessarily agree with. He does say that it's important to it's important to actually be innovative and creative when it comes to adaptations. Like, if you read like the original, you should just read the book. And he says that if you put it on the big screen or the small screen, you should be allowed to change and reinvent the story. And also, he says, to appease the people, that in another 10 years you'll see another adaptation. And I think I agree partially with like trying to reinvent the wheel a bit, but also I do think that the main point of putting something on the big screen or the small screen is to be seen and to be sold to people, and to be, there is a marketing part and a financial, like a business hat that you need to put on, as Grace Randolph would say. Like, you need to also be smart when it comes to these things, and that's why many successful book adaptation work, because they are as truthful as possible to the original material. Yes, you're never going to appease everyone, but the biggest adaptations like Harry Potter or like the Hunger Games or even Heat of Rivalry recently, as we were discussing, they do get one thing right, and that is the main plot line, and they do sort of quote unquote fan service by being truthful to peak moments in a story. They understand what the fan favorite moments are in a story, and they try to nail those moments as hard as possible. I don't think here Emerald Fennell gets that. She tries to like be extensively creative at her own fault in that sense, and the movie is faltering because of that as well. So yeah, I think there's a happy medium that can be definitely found, but also at the same time, I think if you're trying to like, produce a blockbuster or like a movie that is like supposed to be seen by everyone with big names, you're supposed to at least get the main plot points correct. If you want to do like a more indie representation of the movie or a more like artistic point, then don't sell it as much. Like this movie has Charlie XCX as the main soundtrack. Charlie XCX produced an entire album for this movie, so it is supposed to be like a big moment. And is it? I don't think so. I don't think he achieved what it was supposed to do, but I do still think there are some great moments. Again, as I said, mostly the direction, like the visual direction of the movie, the interesting, perspective that she brings in terms of like sexualization and like, sexual desires and all that stuff. But yeah, there's a lot to be said. There's a lot just left unsaid, let's just say. There's a lot that's left unexplored, and we desperately want that. I think that's the point. Anyways, that ends the main part of the episode. I'll get into the sponsor, and then we'll get into songs of the week, because yes, girl, I have so many to discuss. Stay tuned, stay with me for a bit more. Okay, very quick detour. Let's talk about hair for a second, because I don't know who needs to hear this, but your hair is not supposed to feel like a sad broom that's seen too much. This is why I'm excited to talk about Yarok with you all. They make plant-based vegan hair care, shampoos, conditioners, and styling stuff. And it's all made with organic ingredients, no sulfates, no parabens, no alcohol. None of the things that sound like they belong in a science lab. It's one of those brands that makes your shower feel slightly more luxurious, like you have your life together, even though most likely you don't. And right now, you can get 50% off any product, and this is their best discount that they offer. When you use code overshare pamphlet at yarokhair.com, you get 50% off. And for full transparency, I do earn a commission when you use my code. So if you buy, you support the show and your hair. And also your hair as well stops beefing with you, so everybody wins. Yeah, check it out. It's again yarokhair.com, and you can use the code overshare pamphlet. Alright, songs of the week. Get ready, because there's a lot. We're starting off with Pitiful by Remy Wolf, and this is from her album, I think, Big Ideas. That's the one. Transparency, I haven't listened to the full album, but every now and then I keep on getting a song from it, and every now and then I'm like, this album sounds incredible. There's always something that I like, but this song specifically is just the best one. Like, I think I'm actually so obsessed with it, because it's like so groovy and so bass, like the actual instrument bass oriented, but also there's that guitar riff at the end that is just so good. Very, very nice. Also very catchy. There's a lot of interesting like beep boop sounds in the song that I think are just very interesting. But I think the repetition of like pitiful, that's like very catchy, very, very, very catchy. Rain Wolf is so talented, and I think Lola Young stole her success because out of the two, is the most talented. But we move on. We move on. We move on. Anyways, next. Speaking of Wuthering Heights, from the Wuthering Heights soundtrack by Charlie XCX, "Dying for You" is the best song on the album, I think. But I would like to say, in general, the album feels very, very interesting, and it's so cool. The usage of like strings in this, like trying to evoke, the 1800s, but spin like with a Charlie XCX spin with a bit of a hyperpop influence in there, just so cool. But I would listen to this one to get the feeling of it, and this is the best song, I think. So cool. I love it. And still on the Charlie XCX train, I guess we can discuss the song that I know I'm late to the party, but Claws. Out of how I'm feeling right now, I think Claws is the best song. Hot take. I mean, I just love Claws so much. Just there's something about it, just the beat, the hyper pop version of it all, like it's just so cool. And I don't know, for whatever reason now it's clicking. It's just like really, really registering for me. So listen to Claws. I just like the way it sounds like a nursery rhyme sometimes as well. But it's just so cool. I love it. I love that song. It's been a repeat. This too bad it's so short, but I'm loving it. And still in the hyperpop wave, we have Do It, Eve remix. Eve from K-pop, from ex Luna member, and it's by Underscores, but it's the Eve remix. This is hyperpop perfection. Honestly, Eve is surprising me every single time she releases. There's something so interesting. She's so tasteful. Like, I'm honestly so impressed by how she's handling her career. She's just very, very talented. I just cannot, like, I'm very obsessed with this, so please listen to that. And to close, we have Cynic by Stella Lefty. This is more in the power ballad indie rock side of it all. The vocals clear. The vocals clear. It's very catchy. I like the bridge. Oh my god, the bridge is so good. The energy in the bridge just picks up so much. It's like, I think it's a notch above like a power ballad, but it definitely is a power ballad. I definitely recommend listening to it. But there's a lot of I think a lot of interesting stuff this week. A lot of famous names, but also a lot of non-famous names, I guess. So there's a bit for everyone. To check out the playlist, you can just go to Spotify and search the Overshare Pamphlet Song of the Week, February 2026. I do one for each month, and I talk all the songs that I talk about in that specific month are in this playlist. So check it out. Check it out. And with that said, see you in the next episode, guys. Enjoy.